doing shout outs. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Elisa. Hello, welcome. Shout out to Yisel. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Darcy. Shout out to Ruhi. Shout out to Sawyer. Shout out to Fernanda. Shout out to Amaya, or Amia. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Ashley. Shout out to Lola. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Allie. Shout out to Divya. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Arena. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to Xavier. Shout out to Arena. Oh, Arena, I got you. Shout out to Ruhi. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Grace. Shout out to Kaylee. Shout out to Bear Bear. Shout out to Zoe. Shout out to Cowley. Shout out to Rose. Shout out to Zara. Shout out to Mallory. Shout out to Evelyn. Shout out to Addison. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Tank. Whoops, why did I put that? I'm so sorry. Let me write it again. I put Tanky. Shout out to Tank. There we go. Shout out to Richard. Shout out to Ajax. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Lucky. Shout out to Daniela. Shout out to Alexis. Shout out to Ollie. Shout out to Melanie. Shout out to Elsa. Shout out to Sumaya. Shout out to Addison. Shout out to Adele. Shout out to Alana. Shout out to Jalea. Shout out to Bree. Shout out to Jamal. Shout out to Brooke. Shout out to Victoria. Shout out to Breeze. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Lola. Shout out to Scarlett. Shout out to Iqbal. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Julia. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Isaiah. Shout out to Adeline. Shout out to Alex. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Ashreet. Shout out to Mila. Shout out to Alice. Shout out to Yaretsi. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Mears. Sorry if I mispronounced her name. Shout out to Fatima. Shout out to Briella. Shout out to Camila. Shout out to Anise. Shout out to Ali. Shout out to Layla. Shout out to Olivia. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Arena. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Dara. Shout out to Ada. Shout out to Brixton. Shout out to Avery. Shout out to Danya. Shout out to Nancy. Shout out to Luna. So I just have these, oh, sorry. I just have these notebooks and I do shout outs and then I just leave the notebook on my desk. Shout out to Jade. Shout out to Isabel. Shout out to 11. Shout out to Adenari. Shout out to, you're welcome. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Grace. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Titala. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Juliet. Shout out to Kendall. Shout out to Eric. Shout out to Mirab. Shout out to these markers. I think I got these on Amazon. Shout out to Elena. Shout out to Emma. Shout out to Prince. Shout out to Reva. Shout out to Jaffa. Shout out to, bye, you're welcome. Shout out to Jada. Shout out to Taryn. Shout out to Claire. Shout out to Mia. To answer your question, since I'm still kind of new to this, I don't really remember a lot. But I think as time goes by, I think I'll start remembering more of like the names and of the subscribers and that kind of thing. Shout out to Charlie. Shout out to Olivia. Shout out to Lucille. Shout out to Yanni. Shout out to Janelle. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Write your name in the chat if I haven't shouted you out. I also post other content. I hope you can check it out as well. Shout out to Taylor. Shout out to Tiana. Shout out to Ada. Shout out to Ohana. Shout out to Denise. Shout out to Aitana. Shout out to Cloud. Shout out to Big Keisha. Shout out to Romy. Shout out to Natalia. Shout out to Titala. Shout out to Lorenzo. Shout out to Penny. Shout out to Cami. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to CJ. Shout out to Nevaeh. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Ellie. Shout out to EJ. Shout out to Layden. Shout out to Kyle. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Autumn. Shout out to Raina. Shout out to Louie. Shout out to Paula. Shout out to Kennedy. Shout out to Isla. Shout out to Azuzena. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Julia. Shout out to Sawyer. Shout out to Jonathan. Shout out to Tyla. Shout out to M. Shout out to Lavinia. Shout out to Janet. Shout out to Addie. Shout out to Logan. Shout out to Grace. Shout out to Ever. Shout out to Dara. Shout out to Mimi. Shout out to oh, I just put Dara. Shout out to Hillary. Shout out to Haley. Shout out to Quinn. Shout out to Nevaeh. Shout out to Zoe. Shout out to Mono. Shout out to John. Shout out to Hunter. Shout out to Denesli. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Lilo. You're welcome. Shout out to Usha. Shout out to Milan. Shout out to Hannah. Shout out to Madeline. Shout out to Jonah. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Carter. Shout out to Kirgan. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Isha. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Wyatt. Shout out to Harlow. Shout out to Alicia. Shout out to Chloe. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Afreen. Shout out to Kaya or Kaya. Shout out to Hazelin. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Megan. Shout out to Ruthann. Shout out to Sunghoon. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Riley. Shout out to Jaden. Shout out to AJ. Shout out to Shelly. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Olive. Shout out to Piper. Shout out to Olivia. Shout out to Zalia. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Kaina. Shout out to Chelsea. Shout out to Logan. Shout out to Riley. Shout out to Dylan. Shout out to Maya, or Mia, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Isabelli. Shout out to Haley. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Haley, I got you. Shout out to Katarina. Shout out to Sayani. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Emma. Shout out to Yana. Shout out to Elena. Shout out to Paisley. Shout out to Delilah. Shout out to Laura. Shout out to Naomi. Shout out to Gabby. Shout out to Joyce. Shout out to Carlin. Shout out to Nadine, or Nadine. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Hannah. Excuse me. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Also, write your name again if I haven't gotten to you. Thank you so much for your patience. Shout out to Noah. Shout out to Gracie. Shout out to Isabella. Shout out to Marlon. Shout out to Mina. Shout out to Luz. Shout out to Sumaya. Shout out to Efren. Shout out to Genesis. Shout out to Phoebe. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Anne. Shout out to Amanda. Shout out to Xander. Shout out to Manrit. Shout out to M. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Aniston. Shout out to Izzy. Shout out to Elise. Or Alice. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Dylan. Shout out to Joel. Shout out to Thea. Shout out to Ray. Shout out to Amity. Shout out to Lilo. Shout out to Ivy. Shout out to Hattie. Shout out to Christian. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Isadora. Shout out to Sydney. Shout out to Evelyn. Shout out to Sophia. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Heartsong. Thank you for subscribing. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Lander. Shout out to Hallie. Shout out to Zayden. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Isabelli. Shout out to Alvina. Shout out to Annie. Shout out to Annika. Shout out to Viviana. Shout out to Kavaria. Shout out to Kira. Shout out to Jessica. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Belle. Shout out to Laris. Shout out to Bang Chan. Shout out to Abby. Shout out to Arthur. Shout out to Gervier. Oh no, I messed up. Let me write your name again. Sorry. Shout out to Haven. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Gervier. There we go. Shout out to Rhea. Shout out to Josie. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Alexa. Shout out to Everly. Shout out to Penny. Shout out to Harper. Happy birthday. Shout out to Edwa. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Arabella. Shout out to Viksha. Shout out to Darwin. Shout out to Millie. Shout out to Grace. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Leanna. Shout out to Emma. Shout out to Jasira. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Beans. Shout out to Rayana. Shout out to Annabelle. Shout out to Cole. Shout out to Anita. Shout out to Nua. Shout out to Courtney. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to Evie. Shout out to Kinsley? Isabella, I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. How are you doing? Shout out to Isabella. Shout out to Peyton. Shout out to Lyric. Shout out to Desi. Shout out to Paige. Shout out to London. Shout out to Larissa. Shout out to Richa. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Phoenix. Shout out to Kensley. Shout out to Rosie. Shout out to Ara or Era. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Andy. Shout out to Devesh. Shout out to Christopher. I'm gonna put Christopher over here so that it fits. There we go. Shout out to Lavish. Shout out to Dominic. Shout out to Juji. Did I get that right? Juji. Shout out to Charlotte. Shout out to George. Shout out to Melanie. Shout out to Melchi. Thank you for subscribing. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Carla. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Thank you so much for being here. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Bray. Shout out to Madeline. Shout out to Jace. Shout out to Charlie. Shout out to Mallory. Shout out to Isa. Shout out to Scarlett. Shout out to Aria. Sorry if I mispronounced the name. Shout out to Kendra. Shout out to Emily. Shout out to Olivia. Shout out to Raphael. Shout out to Timothy. Shout out to Sandra. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Penelope. Shout out to Franny. Shout out to Hermione. Shout out to Hope. Shout out to Manu. Shout out to Austin. Shout out to Kagan. Or Keegan. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Jenna. Shout out to Haley. Shout out to Vanellope. Shout out to Haven. Shout out to Yue. Thank you for subscribing. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Chi Chi. Shout out to Juji. Shout out to Shani. Shout out to Nyla. Shout out to Kenna. Shout out to Carmela. Shout out to Jimena. Shout out to Hadley. Shout out to Serenity. Shout out to Andrea. Shout out to Shakila. Shout out to Clement. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Genesis. Shout out to Shaya. Shout out to Harper. Happy birthday. Shout out to Charlie. Shout out to Kavisha. Shout out to Devin. Shout out to Cedric. Shout out to Skylar. Whoops, why did I put a K? Shout out to Kyrie. Shout out to Skylar. Shout out to Daniel. Shout out to Yunche. Happy birthday. Shout out to Tween. What is it? Tween Winnie? Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Tween. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Derek. Shout out to Jolene. Shout out to Alana. Shout out to Gabriella. Shout out to Starla. Shout out to Nia. Shout out to Jordan. Shout out to Brady. Shout out to Austin. Shout out to Angel. Shout out to Michael. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Luna. Shout out to Justin. Shout out to Evelyn. Shout out to Kurt. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Myra. Shout out to Nico. Shout out to Juliana. Shout out to Melinda. Shout out to Stella. Shout out to Oakley. Shout out to Brianna. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Cruz. Shout out to Tokyo. Shout out to Belle. Thank you for your patience. I'm so sorry. Sometimes the chat goes really fast and I write slow. Shout out to Lisbeth. Shout out to Kyla. Shout out to Junior. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to Orion. Shout out to, was it Bailey? I hope I wrote it correctly. Shout out to Holden. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Ami. Shout out to Harper. Shout out to Cecilia. Shout out to Daniel. Shout out to Kinsley. Shout out to Aiken. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Laura. Shout out to Victoria. Shout out to Hylia. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Skyla. Shout out to Slater. Shout out to Seth. Shout out to Luke. Shout out to Nyla or Neela. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Maria. Shout out to Lena. Shout out to these people. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna get water. Thank you for your patience. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Write your name in the chat if I haven't gotten to you. Also, thank you so much for your patience. I truly appreciate it. Shout out to Jeremiah. Shout out to Manon. Shout out to Julius. Shout out to Karina. Shout out to Rebecca. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Angel. Shout out to Arzan. Shout out to Lucy. Shout out to Jayla. Shout out to Aurora. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Shiloh. Shout out to Zosie. Shout out to Anna Yelid. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Kennedy. Shout out to Case. Shout out to Cadence. Shout out to Alessia. Shout out to Jessica. Shout out to Dylan. Shout out to Piper. Shout out to Dylan. Shout out to Lisa. Thank you for your support. Shout out to Evelyn. Shout out to Legacy. Shout out to Valeria. Shout out to Savannah. Shout out to Marlene. Shout out to Leo. Shout out to Haley. Shout out to Saul. Shout out to Jazzy. Shout out to Kenan. Shout out to Alexa. Shout out to Ray. Shout out to Zoe. Shout out to Janaya. Shout out to Alessa. Shout out to Kai. Shout out to Drake. Shout out to Malaysia. Shout out to Leah. Shout out to Sloan. Shout out to Shambi. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to Ali. Shout out to Sky. Shout out to Genevieve. Shout out to Trey. Shout out to Genesis. Shout out to Henley. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Ivani. Shout out to Celestine. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Joshua. Shout out to Ace. Shout out to Rosalia. Shout out to Kate. Shout out to Mario. Shout out to Adelina. Shout out to Lizzie. Shout out to Penny. Shout out to Rakai. Shout out to Solar. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Destiny. Shout out to Amanda. Shout out to Adrian. Shout out to Waylon. Shout out to Dario. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Dallas. Shout out to Deleza. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Staley. Shout out to Emma Bella. Shout out to Canton. Shout out to Kaizan. Shout out to Nia. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Gamar. Shout out to Arden. Shout out to Emma. Shout out to Zikel. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Audrey. Shout out to Carly. Shout out to Missy. Shout out to Millie. Shout out to Paola. Shout out to Bella. Shout out to Adias. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Grace. Shout out to Genesis. Shout out to Isla. Shout out to Brex. Shout out to Miley. Or Maylee. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Ashley. Shout out to Angela. Shout out to Nilani. Happy birthday. Shout out to Louie. Shout out to Ava. Shout out to Zara. Shout out to these people. Should I do one more page? Okay, one more page. On to the next page. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Thank you so much for being here. Shout out to Cassandra. Shout out to Roman. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Natalie. Shout out to Cooler Than You. Shout out to Cynthia. Shout out to Onisha. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Cadence. Shout out to Julia. Shout out to CJ. Shout out to Soraya. Shout out to Casey. Shout out to Catherine. Shout out to Emma. Shout out to Kaden. Shout out to Cassidy. Shout out to Sunshine. Shout out to Alice. Shout out to Chucha. Shout out to Rhea. Shout out to Hasanat. Shout out to Kinsley. Shout out to Deleza. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Adele. Shout out to Yuki. Shout out to Cadence. Shout out to Mishu. Shout out to Haley. Shout out to Max. Shout out to Isabella. Shout out to Nikita. Shout out to Amira. Shout out to Tony. Shout out to Addie. Shout out to Sierra. Shout out to Ava. Shout out to Jeremiah. Shout out to Ashley. Shout out to Ray. Shout out to Chase. Shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Tia. Shout out to Indigo. Shout out to Oakley. Shout out to Aliana. Shout out to Raina. Shout out to Amy. Shout out to Euritzy. Shout out to Rixan. Shout out to Rhea. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Happy. Shout out to Daisy. Shout out to Key. Shout out to Abdira. Shout out to Cam. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Phoenix. Shout out to, oh, thank you for subscribing, Phoenix. Shout out to Shirley. Shout out to Yunche. Shout out to Juniper. Shout out to Aaron Vin. Shout out to Nuno. Shout out to Levi. Shout out to Audrey. Shout out to Oliver. Shout out to May. Shout out to Wyan. Shout out to Lila. Shout out to Ava. Shout out to Bree. Shout out to June. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Melanie. Shout out to Dominic. Shout out to Hannah. Shout out to Willow. Shout out to Kamora. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Nakari. Shout out to Wendy. Shout out to Sage. Shout out to Dariani. Shout out to Haley. Shout out to Raya. Shout out to Camila. Shout out to Zykel. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Mana. Shout out to Alexa. Shout out to Maheen. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Daniela. Shout out to Riley. Shout out to Sadie. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Sailor. Shout out to Ramsey. Shout out to Carter. Shout out to Daisy. Shout out to Benedict. Shout out to Khaleesi. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Rose. Shout out to Emily. Shout out to Alex. Shout out to Leanne. Shout out to Melissa. Shout out to Rona. Shout out to these people. Thank you so much for being here. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the live stream. I live stream every day, so I hope you can join me and subscribe to support my channel. Thank you so much. Take care. I will see you next time. Bye.